I'm Hal Humphreys. Welcome to this special edition webinar from Appraiser eLearning. I think it's critical for us as appraisers to learn about new tech that can make our lives easier. To that end, Appraiser eLearning is bringing you this webinar because we want to share useful things with you, our fellow appraisers. To be honest, I'm a bit of a Luddite. I like pencil and I like paper. And it took me way too long to even try mobile inspection apps. I still have a 100-foot tape measure in my truck. I still have a clipboard and graph paper, but I haven't used either in years. Now, I do my inspections using my iPhone and a disto. I've used CubiCasa several times now, and I like it. The drawings are much more professional looking, and in my experience, they are as accurate, if not more so, than my personal measurements and drawings. Last year, the team over at CubiCasa and I cooked up the idea for this webinar, a chance for them to give me and you a look under the hood. This is also a chance to consider additional services we as appraisers can offer, other ways to earn money. I'll be monitoring your questions and comments throughout this webinar. I'll do my level best to get to as many of your questions as I can. Obviously, we may not get to everyone, but I'll try. We have Genevieve Cline from CubiCasa and John Brenan from Clear Capital here to give us a walkthrough of CubiCasa and answer your questions. John, Genevieve, welcome. I'm going to hand this over to you, John, at this point and kind of let you take control of the situation.
Sounds great, Hal. Thanks so much. And thanks everybody for joining us today. Hal hit it on the head. We've really got kind of a little bit of a dual purpose here today. As appraisers that may not be familiar with CubiCasa, my colleague Genevieve is going to do a little bit deeper dive so you can see some of the things that it can do and how it might be able to help you. And I'm going to speak first on a little bit like Hal talked about how you might be able to consider, particularly in this down market, ancillary services, things that you may not have thought about doing as an appraiser that some of which CubiCasa may very well help you with. So this is, by all means, this is designed for our appraiser friends, but hopefully getting you to think a little bit outside the box in terms of what you've done on a day-to-day basis and what you're doing today. Again, particularly with where we see the market right now. So, Hal, if you want to go ahead and advance the slide there. This is a CubiCasa webinar. I am John Brenan, as Hal said. I am the Chief Appraiser at Clear Capital. CubiCasa is a company under Clear Capital. It's actually a separate company, but we are affiliated, so that's why you see me as part of this. I talked about the opportunities. Jen is going to spend a lot of time talking about what CubiCasa is and the benefits, and show you some of the real good stuff. As a long-term appraiser, and I think it's funny that Hal talked about some of those old tools. I think I still have in a drawer somewhere some of those rub-on arrows and graphics. I mean, for those of you that have been around for a minute, I think you'll probably remember those. But I think that what we can really do is as Hal talked about, really trying to bring things forward and see where that can assist you. And then we want to leave some time for Q&A and try to answer as many of your questions as possible. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide. And I want to kind of highlight what the issue here is. And many of you have probably seen this slide several times, or this graph, I should say. It's published by Freddie Mac, and they have been updating it pretty much monthly for quite some time. And what you see on this graph is really the nature of our businesses. So, every business, every industry, maybe with a few notable exceptions, but just about every industry has highs and lows, good times, bad times, etc. I will say that my observation after 40 years in this business is the swings in our business tend to be very, very big. So the highs get very high, like we had in the last part of 2020 and 2021, and the lows get very low. Whereas, a lot of people right now are seeing the those who do appraisals for residential mortgage lending are seeing the volume very, very low. And you can see that in the chart, in the blue and the green numbers, how they've gone up and down over the years since 2015 anyway, for both refinance and purchase transactions. But you do see too that the number of appraisers until very recently, and I'll just talk about that in a quick second, but that number, which represents the number of appraisers that unique appraisers that have submitted through the UDCP. So in other words, they've done appraisals for Fannie or Freddie. That number has remained unbelievably constant despite those huge spikes and valleys in mortgage volume. Now, if you do look at that yellow line, interestingly, here in the last few months, you've seen that number decline quite a bit. Now, on one hand, you can say that that could represent, the lack of volume and fewer appraisers are actually getting assignments. But keep in mind, even if an appraiser just does one assignment, they would be on that line. So you've got a significantly declining number that are providing appraisals to the GSEs through the UCDP, excuse me, and some people may suggest that this is the beginning of the cliff that so many people have talked about, where appraisers will be retiring and doing other things, etc. I've been hearing that for 40 years, that appraisers are going to start retiring, and we're going to have no appraisers, etc. Whether that's what we're seeing here or whether it's just a part of a cycle, but it is worth noting that over the last 8 years, this was the first time you've really seen it dip down to what looks to be about 30,000 appraisers from the traditional 40,000 or so, which, just doing the math, that's a 25% decline. That's a pretty significant number. So anyway, I bring that up because not just do I find it interesting and that, it's something to consider in terms of your overall work volume and plans and business plans and such, but also to kind of see where the issue is. And really the message here is you don't want to put your eggs in one basket, right? I mean, I've been telling friends for years, diversify your appraisal practice and maybe even diversify your the types of services that you offer. So whether it be an appraisal practice and considering things like the new desktop and hybrid appraisals, where maybe you didn't want to do those before, and maybe you still don't, but maybe it's worth examining. But also other types of services you can provide in the real estate and lending spaces, such as property data collections or some level of inspections, or providing floor plans using a tool like CubiCasa for real estate agents. So we'll talk more about that if we go to the next slide. I think that, there we go. I think that the biggest message that I can try to get across here is, most individual independent fee appraisers, we need to make sure that you have a business to run. And I know a lot of appraisers who their business model is, sit by the computer and wait for orders to come in. And, one of the things that I find really interesting is that there are a lot of people that aren't particularly in the appraisal sector, that are not really comfortable with marketing themselves and networking. And in fact, so many appraisers today are former real estate agents who got into real estate because they liked it, but really didn't like the networking and marketing aspect of it and selling themselves. But folks, you need to do this to some degree if you're going to have a viable business. It just doesn't work to sit by the phone or sit by the computer and wait for that next order to come in. You need to be a professional and market yourself and network just like any other professional. So I talked about some non-traditional appraisal assignments. Those can be desktops, they can be hybrids. Um, I think there have been a lot of articles and things published about, and seminars and webinars about non-lender business, whether it be for, looking at real estate listings, the inspections, expert witness testimony, litigation support, probate, estate appraisals, divorce appraisals. There are a lot of things to diversify within appraisal practice that you really, if you haven't considered, it is an awesome time to consider. One of the other things that's really, really important at this point is to use this time to improve yourself in terms of either getting more familiar with technology that you may not have been, whether it's a matter of taking courses to, let's say, upgrade your license. Maybe if you're a licensed appraiser, give you the opportunity to be a certified appraiser, and things like that you might want to specialize in. Let's say you want to try to focus on complex properties. Educate yourself on these things. This is the time to do that. I know it's difficult because I think that when the market's down and we're not getting a lot of revenue, you don't want to spend money, because of that. But this really is the ideal time to invest in yourself and invest in your business. I think that some of you have probably seen things like I believe there's a McKissick publication out there that says appraisers who are adopting new technology earn on average $44,000 a year more than appraisers that don't. Those are the kind of things that I would urge you to be considering right now. I think that when we come to, in just a second here, I'm going to turn it over to Genevieve to start diving into CubiCasa. But what we want you to think about too on these additional services is, real estate agents, when they list a house, they usually don't do all of these things themselves. They don't measure the house themselves necessarily. Some do. They don't take the photographs for the MLS listings themselves. Some do, but a lot of them use professionals for these things. We think that there is an opportunity for appraisers who utilize CubiCasa either in their appraisals or otherwise to be able to get into this business and provide these floor plans for listings for real estate agents. Those floor plans that are provided, that they don't include the GLA like they do on your appraisals, but those are available and you can use, and the cost for those is nothing. You would actually be able to go out and provide this service and not cost you anything additional. And the real benefit here is you're building relationships with those agents and with those real estate folks to where that can very well help you down the road in your appraisal practice. So I really want you to just think about, opening up the box a little bit and thinking about things that you haven't. And what we're going to do now is show you what CubiCasa does and be able to kind of think through how that might work for you. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my good friend Genevieve, and she's going to bring you through the CubiCasa portion.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, I'm Genevieve. I'm with CubiCasa, as John's already mentioned. We're going to get more into the CubiCasa specific stuff so that you can get an idea of what's going on. So why don't we just hop right into it if you want to bring up the slide. Awesome. So like John just mentioned, there is a huge demand for floor plans. We see, and we'll get into a little later, some of the stats that are out there about the interest in having floor plans. But they're not really very common. It's only about 5 to 10% of listings that have them. A big part of this is the ease of obtaining a floor plan. As every appraiser probably knows, it's not necessarily the easiest skill set to learn, especially if you're sketching by hand. So in the past, a lot of the time, what a real estate agent would do in order to get a floor plan is hire out an appraiser, which hasn't always been necessarily been the most costly or affordable or available thing to do. You know, if you have a lot of appraisal work coming in, it might not be worth your time to go out to a home briefly to do a sketch for what the price that a real estate agent might be willing to pay. Additionally, because people couldn't learn it, only recently have other avenues been coming into availability, such as getting floor plans with technology like 3D scans or like CubiCasa. And that's mostly been in the realm of photographers, but they offer that as part of packages a lot of the time. And it might not always be as affordable as someone might like, or if they only want the floor plan, it might not be available. So, this is where, as an expert in the field, people are more likely to consider an appraiser a trusty service for a floor plan. So, you can definitely potentially market to a real estate agent for that kind of information. If you want to go ahead and go to the next slide. So this is some of the information just to show the desire for it. Buyers say that they're more likely to view a house in person if the listing has a floor plan. It was 81% in the survey that Zillow did that answered that way. And then additionally, floor plans are highly desired, coming only after photos and detailed information like the GLA of the property. So it's pretty critical. So this is just another option that you could potentially pursue because it is such a big gap in the market. If you want to go ahead. And then it is very scalable. Like we just talked about all of these issues in getting a floor plan. If you're using a technology, it might be more worth your time to go ahead and go out there for a lower price point. And it still might not be as low as you might think, considering technology solutions exist, just because it's not well known necessarily that these options are around. And this is whether or not you're using technology or if you wanted to offer sketch floor plans as a hand drawn item, right? You could do that as well, where you're offering that to agents in down markets as an additional revenue stream. But that's just one item we wanted to touch on as a potential opportunity that you could pursue. If you want to go ahead and go to the next slide. There are a few different things that we see people use this for. A lot of them aren't necessarily directly related to appraisals or appraiser work, such as like contracting, but a few that we do see is the real estate listings that we just talked about. Obviously, appraisals and inspections are another place that you might need a floor plan that you could use a service like ours to help get additional work. If you want to go ahead and go to the next slide. And then, so some reasons you might be interested in using CubiCasa. It's travelable. You know, you can fit it in your pocket because it's just on your phone. You don't need to bring any special hardware. It might take down the number of items you're bringing to a property if you, depending on your process and depending on what kind of work you're doing. You don't really need any special training. There's no special hardware needed, so you don't have to invest a lot of time, even if you just want to try it out. And it is a new technology, and you know, as it will only get better. Essentially, is the way I would think of it. Where as time goes on, you'll probably see these become more and more prevalent, and it might be nice to be kind of on the cutting edge of that. Next slide. So now that we've talked about some of the opportunities, I do want to touch on our GLA output. When we're talking about appraisals, there's obviously specific needs that you'll have if you are using something like CubiCasa for appraisal work specifically. So we do have a GLA specific output that aligns to ANSI. You can download it as a PDF, and then you can upload that into your appraisal report. It has information such as the GLA itself. It separates out below and above grade area for you so that it's easy to determine what you want to have as your BGLA versus your actual GLA. It has separation for finished and unfinished areas. It shows egress options so that you can tell if there's an ADU or if there's something unique going on in the room, functional obsolescence, a lot of those kinds of information points. And it has, exterior dimensions and an area calculation. You can't see that in this particular shot, but there are the area calculations so that you fulfill your needs for the lender. And then you can also edit the sketch in certain ways so that, say, an area is not heated, you can account for that. We obviously won't be able to tell in a scan if a room's heated for the most part. So that's something that you have the power to go ahead and change so that it's not entirely reliant on visual data. We can go to the next. We do also detect ADUs. I briefly touched on that. We do it based on the Fannie Mae recommendations for ADU. So it has to have things like a kitchen, but it has its own color. You can see all of our GLA information has different colors assigned to the different property descriptions, is the way I would put it. So an ADU is going to be in that like indigo color. Finished living area that is above grade will be in green. Finished below grade area is in a yellow. And then unfinished or exterior areas are in red to indicate that they are not living area at all. And we can go on to the next one. So now that we've kind of talked about the actual output, I want to go through how it works. I think that especially for our appraisal users, it's very important that we make sure you understand what the technology is doing, how it works, and kind of why that output comes out the way it does. So when you do your scan, the entire time the phone is taking dimensions with the technology embedded in the phone. And then that information gets converted into a 3D point cloud. So it's kind of like a 3D model that is interpreting the structure of the house as a whole. And then it gets plotted onto essentially a graph. So every wall, every corner isn't just, a line connected to a line. It is a vertice on a graph so that the dimensions can be really accurately determined, and the entire house is kind of more holistic than we might think when we're sketching by hand. And then that creates the final outputs for a variety of different end products. So whether you're doing a GLA floor plan, you're getting a real estate listing floor plan, or you want something like a property information output, we have that kind of information available. So that's the very basic level of how it works. We can go on to the next. And so this is just going to show you how scanning actually works. It's literally, sign up for the app, go in, press you want to do a new scan, input some basic information like the address, and then you just take your phone and you start to scan, basically following the interior perimeter of the property. You can kind of think of it like you want to show the walls that are critical to the home, right? We want to have that footprint by following that area, but at the same time, you're kind of showing you're walking parallel to it rather than like pointing it at the wall, like you kind of might think with like a disto. So it's just getting a path, kind of seeing the wall, and then mapping that as it goes, getting dimensions the entire time again, including vertical height for things like ceiling. So that's very basically how it works, not very complicated. We can go ahead on to the next. So one of the main areas, especially for appraisers who are very comfortable with sketching, that you might be able to find use for a tool like CubiCasa is on very high-end or complex properties. And this is whether it's for a listing or for an appraisal report. Both work just fine for our technology. So you can see an example here of a very unique pool house type property, lots of angle or circular partial walls. We can map out that kind of information and produce something that, can look nice for a listing purpose. So that's what you're seeing there is a listing floor plan example in black and white. There's other things that can be done to make it look nice as well for listing floor plans, but that's like the baseline. So it's nice if you don't maybe want to go through all the work, or if you are doing like a listing floor plan and you don't, you need the compensation to be equivalent to the work. This property would probably take a while to sketch, so maybe it's easier to use the technology to do it. We can do the next slide. Here's another example. This one's with a GLA out, but it's only the first floor of 2. But as you can tell, it's a very complex house, lots of curved walls, lots of odd angles, huge open to below area. Things like curved staircases, curved walls, angled walls, all of that's not really that big of an issue for the technology, since it's creating that 3D mapping of the property rather than viewing it as a wall to wall to wall connection. So it can really ease your experience if its property is particularly complex, where you don't, especially if it's one that's insane like this, where you're not even sure if you'll be able to sketch it probably. So this is another opportunity for it, especially in luxury homes on listings where someone's more likely to put out more money to get something like a floor plan. We can go to the next. And then this one is a more simple house overall, but it has a good example of functional obsolescence. I know that a lot of appraisers, you have to show functional obsolescence in the sketch, but adding in those interior walls can be a bit of a pain point. A lot of people that I've talked to, if they're adding in interior walls, they really want them to be to scale, even if they aren't required to. So this is a good opportunity for something like that, where on the sketch on the right, you can see that there is a bedroom accessed through the closet of another bedroom at the top. So stuff like that might be easier to portray using a scan rather than just relying on hand sketching. And we can do the next slide. We do have a volume discount that John mentioned briefly earlier. Basically, even our free floor plans, so the listing floor plans, if you don't do anything special with them, are free. So if you are doing that extra volume with a alternate income source like listing floor plans or inspections, anything where you might be using that free option or not, they all count towards this volume discount. So theoretically, you could do something like you can start getting the volume discount at 20 scans. So if you wanted to do like 20 scans for listings, and then you did one for an appraisal report, the money that you spend for the GLA output could be discounted from those free scans you did. So just wanted to touch on that. It's an interesting option that you have. And we can move on to the next one. So we've kind of talked about all of this. This is just a general summary. Reasons you might be interested in using CubiCasa are that it's easy to use, it's consistent, it has a nice looking output, especially for certain maybe properties, customers, if you're doing a listing floor plan, and then there's that volume-based discounting you might be able to take advantage of. And we can move on to the next slide. We're getting ready to do our Q&A.
So we've got the Q&A screen up. I think what I will do is take us over to the screen that shows.
Oh, we lost your audio, Hal.
So we've got several questions from the crowd already that I think are pretty interesting. The first one is not actually a question. I think it goes back to the comment that I made about being a Luddite and John made about the old technology that we all use. Carol Huffman says, forms and worms. If you've been in this business for a minute, you know exactly what she's talking about. Let's see. Sue Sauer says, I did a CubiCasa sketch the other day. The garage was not lined up properly. It needed to be scooted over 2 feet to the left. Is this something that CubiCasa can fix?
Yeah, I can take that one. That's a good question. So it kind of depends on how it attaches. Generally, we don't do edits for things like dimensions because it is that 3D plotting of the home. So, if you think of it like if you were to ask to make one wall different, it would affect other walls, right? So it can be really hard to affect a 3D model plotted on a 2D map essentially effectively. But if it is a garage, like if we're thinking of a very typical rectangular home where a garage is connected to it, both squares or easy, simple connection, we might be able to go ahead and move that a few feet over just because it's where it connects. It's not really changing any dimensions. I'd have to double check though for sure.
And is that something that an appraiser would send in a request saying, hey, I've got this sketch. It seems to be a little wonky. Can you scooch it over for me?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yes, we have some things you can do on your own, like if you want to change a label, or like I was saying before, if you wanted to change if an area is finished or not, if a floor is below grade or not, things like that you can do on your own. But something more complex like that, you can send in a fix request. Uh, Even if it's something that might be weird, we'll at least see if we can do it and give it a shot.
Fair enough. Okay. Kathy Harper, good friend down in Texas, asked earlier on, will we see how CubiCasa works? I think we got a nice little demonstration today. What I would suggest, and this is just me talking here, download the app, try it out. When I first went to mobile sketching using Total for mobile and then the AeL Nexus product, I made myself, and I got this tip from Dustin Harris, the appraiser coach. I made myself try it 10 times. And what happens is the first time you try it, you're going to get frustrated, right? You're going to be like, oh, I don't understand this. But by 10 times, you're going to be more comfortable with it. And what I did with CubiCasa is I was at a friend's house in Fort Worth, Texas. I got out a measuring tape and I measured the house and did the appraiser thing, just measured it straight up the way I normally would. Then I got CubiCasa out and did the scan. And it actually caught things that I hadn't thought to catch, such as a closet that was kind of a pantry hidden area. It noticed, hey, there's something there. I didn't think to mention it because I didn't see it. So give it a try. Download the app. Give it a try. Genevieve, how much does it cost to download the app?
Downloading the app is free, and if you want to try it with interior dimensions only, you can get that output for free as well. So you could totally try it. Maybe do it side by side. That's something I've heard from a lot of appraisers. We have a lot more hesitancy in the appraisal community around accuracy because it's so much more important, right? Like a real estate agent, mostly you need those interior dimensions. It's not as critical that the walls, the dimensions be accurate. So what I'll hear a lot of appraisers do is start off by doing their hand-drawn sketch and the CubiCasa sketch side by side until they feel comfortable with it.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I did. Is I probably used it 30 times and did a side-by-side sketch. And the thing is, what I found is, number one, it seems like magic to me. John, I scanned my buddy's house in Fort Worth, Texas. The reason I said that one is it's the standard Texas white stone house. These walls are super thick, and it got the GLA right. How do it know?
Yeah, how I'm glad you pointed that out. It definitely, you guys, if you're watching this, if you haven't tried it, just try it. The technology is amazing. As you're going through the scan, you see the little green boxes that the LiDAR is picking up, and that's how it actually calculates it. But I'll tell you, I've been known to be a bit of a skeptic about things. So when it first came out, I tried it on my house, but I didn't just try it on my house. I tried to break it. I put boxes up. I put couches, right against the wall and adjacent to the wall. And I mean, I did everything I could. You didn't open closet doors like you really should. None of it mattered. It all came out. It was exactly right. I mean, how it knows exactly where the interior of a closet is when you don't open the door is beyond me, but it did it. And so I think even if it's something you may be skeptical about or you haven't tried yet, you owe it to yourself to give it a try. The technology is truly amazing. And as Genevieve said, it just gets better with the more recent smartphones and the more recent technology. and our own processes, it is becoming more and more and more user friendly, accurate, and something that I think you'd be pretty wowed by.
I'm going to fly in a couple more questions here. So Michael Carton says, I have used CubiCasa on 60 homes. Problems I have is garage. Homes with a lot of stuff in it and homes with white paint. I still measure home to double check what CubiCasa gives. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I can add a little color to that. So garages are a really common pain point in appraisal sketches that we see, usually because people don't go in as far. The technology, so just to kind of give like an inside look, the technology can see out to about a maximum of 13 feet before we start losing accuracy. And since a garage is one very large room, essentially, they're usually going to be more than 13 feet deep. So when we can't get to within 13 feet of the wall that you're going towards at the, usually the front of the garage, that if we don't get close enough to that, we might not be able to give full or completely accurate dimensions. So that's where we usually say like 5 to 8 feet is a pretty good range to stay away from walls. You don't want to be too close because you blind the camera. But if we don't get in far enough, then that can be an impact. And since garages can be more cluttered, it can be more difficult in some cases to do that. But if you can kind of hit that sweet spot of getting at least about 7 feet, and maybe ideally closer to 10 in, you might see improved accuracy. Um, Bland walls can be an interest. They're kind of an interesting one. It's essentially easier for the technology to lose track of where it's at. Something you could consider is just like putting an object there just so it can tell that there's something there. It's a new room. We don't usually see issues with it, and it's something that we'll probably see less as the technology does improve. Like a LiDAR device is a lot less likely to have issues with that than a device that doesn't have that. But that's something you could potentially do. And there was one more item I know he mentioned. Oh, clutter, right? Um, Clutter, the key is to make sure that where you're scanning shows kind of the area behind the clutter. It doesn't have to be perfect, but like if you were to think of like a garage wall, you might want to do like a little higher, pan a little bit higher so that we can see above the clutter, because it just needs to see some point of the wall or floor, kind of where that connection is. It doesn't have to be at the floor. It's okay if it's too cluttered there, but if we can just kind of, it's like if you went into a room and you were looking around, would you be able to tell where the wall is? If you can make sure that that's captured in the scan, we should be able to capture it too.
Fair enough. I like that. This is a question that's been asked a couple of times so far, and I do want to get to this one. Is CubiCasa compliant with ANSI measuring system?
Yeah. So we when we were creating a GLA output for CubiCasa, we used ANSI as our primary guideline to build out those rules. And that's something I've spent a lot of time having to become familiar with. So things like how to handle stairs, what areas are included in GLA, such as like fireplaces or other things that protrude, all of that is stuff that we have done to align to ANSI. So yes, we do align to ANSI, and we spend a lot of time and care to try to make sure that we are doing that as effectively as possible.
Dennis Dolan asks a really interesting question. This is one that I was curious about at the first. We're asked to do exterior measurements. Talk to me about how CubiCasa gets an accurate exterior measurement just walking through the inside of the house.
Yeah, that's a great one and a very, very common question. So, we currently use a standard wall thickness, and we have obtained that wall thickness through huge amounts of testing across different regions to try to make sure that we are getting an accurate output. In the future, I think we'd like to be able to offer a more variable option for the wall thickness in regards to, if you have a certain, but for the purposes of like ANSI too, a lot of that is about how we're measuring consistently. So I don't think that there should be a significant issue there. But John, if you have any other thoughts, please feel free to pitch in.
Yeah, and you're right. And I saw that question, and I was going to throw that one right in there, and how you did it for us. Yeah, that is right. It's based on what Genevieve just said, as far as what we can come up with, the most standard wall thickness, and we do understand some homes have 2x6 studs, and the wall thickness is a little bit different than 2x4. And again, hopefully in the future, one of the things that is on the table there is being able to adjust that, as the appraiser, to adjust that for the calculation, if there is a difference. But generally speaking, again, we're talking about, you know don't lose sight of the forest from the trees, right? If that wall is actually 1 inch different on its thickness than what's actually there, let's not forget that the overall accuracy is equal or greater than what an exterior wall measurement, typical exterior wall measurements are from appraisers and others. And as I like to say, if you have 10 appraisers measure a home conventionally, you will generally get 11 different answers, right? We've all seen appraisals done by others, and we're like, where'd they come up with that number? So again, even if the thought is this is not 1,000% perfect to the inch, keep in mind the big picture here. It's more accurate, and the more people use it, we're building a consistency and a standard that people can operate with.
And I'd just like to add again, John has mentioned this, I've talked about it. The thing to do, and Genevieve mentioned it as well, do a side by side comparison on a number of measurements that you do the way you normally do them, and see if you can get comfortable with that. If you can't, you can't. It's going to be your decision, whether or not you want to use this. But again, the reason I asked John and Genevieve and Anastasia about doing this webinar is I think this is a really interesting tech tool that we as appraisers can use if we can get comfortable with it. I do want to fly one thing on the screen real quick. Carol Huffman says, I work in Alaska. I'd be wading in waist deep snow today if I didn't have this app. That's another thing to think about. When I've seen appraisers talk about, or real estate agents talk about how difficult it is to measure houses. Here's the thing. I've been doing this basically my entire life. I have pushed my shoulder between holly bush and brick so many times. It is not easy to measure houses always. This definitely makes it easier.
And Carol, can I jump in real quick on one thing on that? Yeah, you talked about the complex properties. Genevieve highlighted that real well. I mean, how many of you that are watching this would drive up to that circle house and just say nope, and just turn around and go back? Listen, it really, that's where it really pays off. But as you use it more and get comfortable with it, even the more conventional houses are quicker. And the thing that I want to underscore here, when it was touched on briefly, but the professionalism. I will say this. I've done expert witness stuff. I've been in administrative hearings. You always want to present the best case scenario. So if you ended up and were in a case with one of the appraisals you did, and you've got a more professional appraisal product, that speaks well for you. It doesn't mean that you're going to win, because if the appraisal was bad but it looks pretty, that's not going to help. But generally speaking, if you've got the standard pencil sketch that they like to call it, with just the single line, it just doesn't carry the same weight as seeing something professional, and it puts you in a better light with either a judge, a jury, or anybody like that. So think about that a little bit too, particularly if you're going to work in complex properties where there could be more discrepancies, there could be more more of a critical eye on those type of appraisal reports. Put your best foot forward.
Something I've heard from appraisers I've talked to, and this is anecdotal, not necessarily factual, but some of them have expressed an increase in their comfort giving their sketch to a lender when it's complex because of the additional detail. They just feel like they're less likely to get pushback when there's so much more information than they might have added in on their own.
Yeah. All right, moving on. Next question. Carol Huffman again. Um, I left a garage out once. Can that be edited back in after the fact?
If it's something like a garage, a simple structure that's a square, you can put in a fixed request and we can usually add that. If
Okay.
you like missed a room too that's on a corner, we could do something like that. If you missed a like whole section of the house, we couldn't do that, right? Like we'd have to, and you'd have to give us the dimensions for it to be accurate.
Okay. This is another question from Carol, and I've spent time with Carol, and she's a super smart appraiser. Can you measure pools and decks by just scanning around the perimeter? Is that possible?
Yeah, we do include decks and pools in the output, and they should be pretty accurate. Decks and things are going to be a little harder to get as perfect as like an interior wall just because it doesn't have that hard perimeter line, and it might just be a little more difficult for us to get it as correct, but it should be pretty good, especially for something that's on the exterior and not affecting GLA type purposes.
And I think we even have some examples. If you go to our website with crazy, I mean, boat docks and things like that. I mean, yes, it can pick up all of those things, and again, adds to a more professional looking floor plan and appraisal report.
One of the things about how CubiCasa works, and John, as appraisers, if we're going to use a discounted cash flow software, we have to have some understanding of the guts of how it works. The sketch they showed at the beginning of the Q&A shows I've heard it referred to, John calls it the 3D model, or Genevieve called it the 3D model. It is the initial scan that you do of the house. I've heard that called a fuzzy scan. It's gathering all this information and putting it together in this 3D model that if you were to see it, it looks weird, right? But there's enough information there for it to piece together, oh, this is a wall, this is a floor, this is a wall, this is a floor kind of business.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Kind of to what John mentioned earlier with closets, it's the same idea. Like if you're not opening a closet door, there are kind of we can use the context around something like that to kind of figure out where it is in most cases. I mean, especially for our audience here, appraisers and anyone who needs a really, really high quality accuracy in theirs, I would still recommend it, especially if it's something that you as an appraiser would take note of. Like I've seen cases where a dormer window has two closets on the side that would have low ceiling. If you don't open a door in a case like that to that closet and make sure that we can see there's a sloped ceiling, we're not going to know that the closets are low. We'll still know that there are closets there most likely. We'll still be able to say that they go out to the exterior line of the house like the dormer window and the other parts, but we won't know that they're low ceilings. So as an appraiser, anything that you would care about, I recommend making sure you scan. But a lot of it's contextual since we have such a complete view of the house when you do the scan of the perimeter. It's pretty easy to get a lot of information to make that and output with.
Yep. Dennis Dolan asks, I walk through a house scanning with phone and it goes into my report. Need more info? I don't know if that's an actual question or he's saying this is an amazing product. Either way, I think it's a valid thing to talk about.
We do get a lot of questions about how to upload it into your report. We don't have, like, we get asked for file types pretty often that you could upload into your like a la mode report pretty often. There's not one super easy file that we can create that would let you like edit it in an editing tool, but we do have a PDF output, or you could do something like a CSV, or sorry, not a CSV, a JPEG or a PNG, and upload that into your report. So we don't have anything that uploads it into a sketching software for you because of the number of options that exist. If it's something we ever find a way to do, we definitely want to. But yeah, you can download the PDF and upload that to your report.
Okay.
And when you download that PDF, as Genevieve has mentioned earlier, if you see something that doesn't seem right, you can put in a request to fix it before you put it in your report.
Good, good, good. All right, let's see here. I'm trying to scroll through these questions real quick. All right, so a question about the cost. Dennis Dolan, in order to put GLA in report, the cost is $15. Is that correct?
That is correct. So if you were doing a very baseline sketch, like for a listing where only interior dimensions were needed and like labels, interior walls, that's totally free. But if you want to do GLA, that's $15. And then there's some additional optional add-ons that you could make use of, like a 6-hour turnaround time instead of the standard 24. If you want to add in fixed furniture, we do have a surprising number of appraisers that like to have things like the stove and that kind of stuff show in the sketch. That's something that you can pay money for. But for appraisal use, you would be paying a minimum 15 without the volume discount.
That's the point I wanted you to underscore real quick, Genevieve, is that, as she mentioned, even if you use free listing type floor plans, they do apply to that volume discount as she mentioned before. So if you did 19 of the free ones and one of the GLA, you hit the volume discount, so that $15 is now less than that.
Let's see here. I'm going to try and get to some more of these questions real quick. All right, so Bob Premix says, is CubiCasa saving these floor plans such that if someone else did it, or is it being shared with other entities? And I think I think what Bob is asking is a question that I've asked before, which is, if I do a floor plan for a realtor that is a non-GLA floor plan, and then I'm asked to provide a GLA floor plan for an appraisal purpose, do I have to go back out and scan it?
So for something like that, basically when you're doing the scan, you own the rights to like that floor plan output. We do own like the data rights to the floor plan information itself, but we don't really currently have like a current use of that that's actively being done. And we don't like sell that information for advertising or anything like that. Like the data is secure. That's the other question we get a lot that I could see being there.
Jen, can we clarify? I think one of the aspects of that question that Hal read was, if you do the scan for a listing, which doesn't include GLA, but later you want to use it for GLA, that doesn't require going back out and rescanning the property, right? We have the ability to provide that based on the original scan, correct?
Yeah, for GLA specifically, if you originally get the free floor plan and then you decide that you want to add the GLA, you can just go to it and basically press a button that says something like unlock GLA. You'll have, that $15 added to your next invoice, but yeah, you can choose to do that later. There are some that are harder, like if you wanted to add fixed furniture, there's a lot of manual processing that can be involved in that. It's not as automatic as the GLA, so for that one, you'll want to do it before you scan, but for GLA, it's not a problem.
You mentioned the furniture in place, the permanent furniture fixtures and stuff like that. One of the things that I have been asked to do in the past as a real estate appraiser is measure a house and provide a floor plan for a homeowner that wants their interior designer to have the floor plan. And here's the thing. I charged really good money for doing that, and they were happy to pay it. I mean, that's another like side business, little side hustle you could do with this.
Yeah, I think that's really one of the underlying point we're talking about here, Hal, is, and especially if you can provide like those the listing floor plans at no cost and work with realtors, because in particularly in the more complex, more expensive homes, they are willing to pay good money for their photographs, good money for their floor plans. These are opportunities that we're hoping that you as appraisers can consider and can open up your book of business.
All right, let's move on here. We got Sven Larson says, is there a way to pause a scan when an outbuilding needs to be captured? So you're halfway through and you realize, oh, there's an outbuilding out there. Can I pause, go do that, and then come back?
Great question, and it's something we've looked into doing. It's very difficult technically in that if you were to pause it, say, between a main building and an outbuilding, it might not be an issue. But say you paused it during the house, we'd lose the context of where you were at. So it's something that we'd like to find a way to implement effectively, but we have to make sure we do it in a way that we don't end up having scans kind of get ruined or messed up in some way because of it. So currently the answer is no. It's something we'd really like to be able to do at some point, though.
But on the other end of that scale, we have no problem with just continuing to scan. Even there could be 30 yards between the house and the outbuilding. Just keep the scan going, and it'll pick up the outbuilding. Is that right, Genevieve?
Absolutely correct. Yeah, you can go through and just keep the scan running as you move between buildings. Not a problem at all. It won't mess up anything or have any negative effect.
How you're not on audio, but I see the question.
Yeah, you see the question there. Sorry about that. So this, I'll leave the question up there. You can see it. This falls into a question I got from my good friend Bob out in California, cowboy hat wearing appraiser who is just an amazing dude. And he said, he actually reached out to me yesterday and said, one of my things is when I measure a house and there's a discrepancy in GLA or something like that, I want to be able to address that with the homeowner on site. Is there a way to get this done quicker?
Great question again. This is something that we don't currently have available, but we don't have like an active solution to, but it's something we're looking into. There's things like potentially showing you areas of the scan that could be improved, or at some point even giving you like a preview that we would like to do. Those are not currently like on our obvious roadmap. Like I couldn't give you a date. We might have something like that, but it is something we would like to improve. Something I would note, just kind of relating to part of what I read of that question, you can be at the property, do the scan without internet access. You can be on airplane mode is what we recommend, and then upload it when you get home. But yeah, regarding the ability to view it on site, currently that cannot be done, but it's very uncommon for it's hard to say if you'll see a discrepancy between what you're expecting measurement wise. It kind of goes back to what John said earlier, 10 appraisers, 11 different dimensions, right? It's hard to find a but when we're talking about like a scan failing, that's exceedingly rare.
Yeah, I think one of the things that on that question, Hal, is maybe it's a blessing in disguise, right? That's one thing that you can tell the homeowner, I don't have the calculations yet. We don't need to squibble over, 50 square feet. I mean, I hate those revision requests and reconsideration requests from homeowners who say, you missed my square footage by 40 square feet. Therefore, that's why my house is $600,000 below what I think it is. Take away that point of contention, have a professional floor plan you can share with them. And then if they have a reason to believe that it's not accurate, you can deal with it at that point. But hopefully that would avoid a face-to-face confrontation with an unruly homeowner, if there's ever such a thing.
Is there ever such a thing? I'm going to read this one real quick. David says, we measure over 4,000 homes in a year. We're using CubiCasa for the interior detail floor plan, not just the GLA. No, for the interior detail floor plan, just not the GLA. So they're using CubiCasa for the detailed floor plan, but they're not using it for the GLA. So that's an interesting take on it. And if you're just using it for the non-GLA floor plan, it's still a really good presentation in your appraisal report. All right, I got one here for you. This is a tough one. I've tried to get tech support for a floor plan, but it has been only through the website. Do you have a phone tech support available?
So we don't have a phone line, but if you are chatting one of our representatives and you come into an issue where you really need to talk to them, they'll set up either a call or a call slash meeting through Google Meets for you, and you can interact that way for a kind of pseudo phone line opportunity.
Okay, that's cool. Um, Dennis Dolan asks again, and the sketch we end up with looks like the ones you showed, and I can say yes.
Yep,
Exactly.
absolutely. We have a few different outputs. So the GLA would be like the red, green, yellow, indigo. Um, the listing floor plan can look a lot of different ways if you want it to. We've got like all kinds of color options so people can show, like, have wet spaces like bathrooms highlight a different color and things like that. So there's actually more ways you can have it display that you can choose in your settings. But yes, those are real floor plans from real houses that were in our presentation.
All right, here's one that I think is really interesting, and I think is a really valid question. Will this measure the finished basement? So you've got a basement, part of it's finished, part of it is not. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, that's a great question. I love it. Yes, absolutely. So, like I said, there's the different colors for finished versus an unfinished basement, but it does have separate area like totals for those areas as well, and it will give you separate dimensions. So if you have a basement that's 1100 square feet and 200 of it is unfinished and the other 900 is finished, it will separate that out color wise. It'll have it in the area breakdown at the bottom separated. Everything that you would expect should be shown.
Okay. All right, I got one from Carol Huffman. I'm going to fly it up on the screen. Everyone needs to come to the NAA AX conference in Sacramento, April 1 through 4, and Genevieve will give you personal training on how to use CubiCasa. Are you going to be there, Genevieve?
I wasn't planning to be, but I don't live that far from Sacramento. I could probably swing it.
I love it. That's awesome.
I will be there, but I am not the expert that Genevieve is. But together we could probably work it through. But it'd be great to have Genevieve there as well.
And Kathy Harper says, I will see you there, Carol. Looks like you're going to the AX conference after all. Let's look real quick. I've got a couple other questions. So Holly McQuarrie asks a really good question, I think. You're on a Cape Cod. You've got some funky rooms upstairs that may not meet your ANSI standards. Can I tell what portion counts for ANSI or not?
Yeah, so that's a great one. The key thing I would say if you're doing a Cape Cod is to make sure, so we didn't go over this in this presentation, but if you're doing a low ceiling area, especially if it's sloped right, since it's going to be varying based on where it's at, make sure you pan up just to show that it's there, just enough to get to, around that like 7 foot mark so that we can figure out like where the height changes and to what degree. So areas that have particularly low ceiling will be excluded from GLA and shown on the sketch for low ceiling height, whereas higher parts won't. So if you have a Cape Cod, you might have like 60% or something that's in GLA and then a portion that's not. Usually it might not be 60/40, but right, something like that. It'll show on the sketch though and be excluded.
And that is aligned to the ANSI standards, as we've said.
Okay, and then Holly, I'm so glad you asked that question because I've got so many things going through my mind right now trying to manage all the questions coming in. But I have thought about this exact same thing. And if it's what you're saying to me, Genevieve, is it's just as simple as take the phone and pan up and get the slope of the ceiling so it knows where the height changes and all that business.
Yeah, and that's also partially assuming like how vertically you're scanning to begin with. It might be that when you go through your scan, because normally you're going to have it pointing just a little bit down, you might see most of the slope pretty well, and we'll be able to figure out where that is. But especially if it's one that has maybe a knee wall that's high, it's really good, especially in appraisal purposes, to just stop, pan up, pan back down, so that we get that full idea of where the height changes, because we are capturing that data.
Okay, very cool. All right, so this is an interesting one, and I'm not an attorney. Neither one of you guys are an attorney that I'm aware of, but I'm going to throw it up there on the screen. Doug says, Hal, an appraiser told me his E&O insurance did not cover floor plans for realtors. Have either of you heard of anything like this?
I have not specifically heard anything related to that. And again, I would also say, how does that differ than you measuring it yourself? You've still got an obligation. So the question is, when you become comfortable with using CubiCasa, it's just like becoming comfortable with measuring it yourself.
Right. And I would also suggest the floor plan you're providing to the realtor is not going to be the GLA floor plan. It's going to be the floor plan only. Doug, I would say for that question, that's a call to your E&O insurance to ask them that question. Because, I mean, here's, again, most everybody in the room knows that I'm a private investigator. I work with attorneys all the time. And when someone starts a thing with, someone told me something, that falls under the hearsay rule. So just check with the E&O insurance and see what they have to say about it. It is a valid, good question, something to think about. So we've gotten basements. All right, here's a good one. Tim Luganbiel, I think I got that right. Is there a specific ANSI disclosure statement that should be added to a report relating to using CubiCasa?
Nothing specific related to CubiCasa. No, just you need to acknowledge in your appraisal report, along with those required ANSI disclosures, that you use the ANSI method in providing it. But there's nothing that is specific to CubiCasa.
Okay. Real quick, my good buddy here in Nashville, Tennessee, Jason Covington says, I've used it only on homes larger than 10,000 square feet, and it works very well. I know I can rely on it, and that's very important when you walk away from a home that's larger like that. Thanks, CubiCasa. So, Jason, thank you so much for the comment. That's awesome of you. Also, Jason points out, and I think this is something that, for those of you in the room, check out the training videos. Go through those things and study them and do that. It will help you out a great deal, in addition to going out and playing with the app. Those are always good little tidbits for anyone, not just appraisers.
Great comments, Jason. Thank you for that.
Yeah, I think we've gotten through all of the questions so far. We've been at it for right at an hour. We've got some more time allotted for this if anybody has further questions. So I'm just going to kind of leave it there. I want to go back to John. You talked about in the beginning when you showed the graph showing the appraisal business over the years going up and down and up and down and up and down. Here's the thing. I've been hearing 1990 or 87 when I started apprenticing with an appraiser here in Nashville. He said to me, "Oh, you don't want to get into this business. It's just 5 years from now there won't be appraisers." When I told my dad in 1983 I wanted to be just like him and be an appraiser, he goes, you don't want to do that. 5 years from now there won't be appraisers. Here we are 40 years later, and there are still appraisers. The market goes up, the market goes down. It just does. We're in a little bit of a slow spell right now. Are there some things different about this slow spell? Yeah, I think there are. But at the end of the day, there is enough work out there, and there will be enough work out there to keep us busy. And, if you can get your head around doing some alternate services like providing floor plans for realtors or designers or stuff like that, or, and I might get shot for saying this, if you want to do property data collection, using CubiCasa to do so is a great way to do it. John and I were talking before the webinar. I'm an analyst. I'm a number cruncher. I'm a typist. Like I do those things. But the thing that I love about this business is going out and looking at homes and seeing the absolutely insanely bizarre things people do design-wise in their homes and the crazy cool things that people do with their homes. And this lets me go out and do that. So, be open-minded when you're thinking about new tech. And again, I know, like I said in the beginning, I'm a bit of a Luddite. I still buy paper books because I like the way they feel in my hand. But guys, we are in a world where fintech is a thing. Every other part of the financial world is getting on board with new tech. let's do it too. This can make your job easier, your life easier, and possibly open up more avenues to earn money. John, Genevieve, I cannot thank you guys enough for taking the time to do this. I've enjoyed spending the time with you. Any last things you want to say before we sign off here?
No, Hal, just thanks everybody for watching and for participating and for keeping that open mind. I've been doing this so long. My mantra is I want appraisers to remain relevant. And I think that this is a way to help move towards that, especially when issues like appraisal modernization are out there. So please check it out. See what you like. See what you don't like. But check it out. And if you have questions, let us know. Genevieve is a wealth of information, and she can help as well.
Genevieve, any last words?
Yeah, just pretty much what John said. Thank you all so much for your time. If you do have any questions or anything comes up, you can definitely reach out to us. Our team is online 24/7 for support. So if you go online and have a random question, you can reach out to them there. Get in touch with us anyway. Sometimes I get drawn into the questions they don't know if that comes up. So look forward to seeing some of you try it out.
Yeah, I love it. And now, since Genevieve has been called out as actually going to attend the ACTS conference, you can find her there. All right, guys, thank you so much for being here. I'm going to go to the next screen and close this out. Everybody, I can't thank you enough for being here. This is a special webinar from Appraiser eLearning. I'm Hal Humphreys, your host. We'll see you next time.